You know, a lot of people want to write a book. They want to tell a story. Some people have had stories in their heads since they were kids. And eventually they believe to themselves, you know, I'm getting older. I want to get the story out. I want to write that book. I want to write that great novel. I want to entertain people. Or maybe it's something they've always had as a hobby as kids, but they've never actually acted on it properly. So I want to talk about how I get my ideas from that initial idea all the way to the finished book. It's not easy, it's not fun sometimes, and it can be very challenging, and that's why you need to be very in love with the idea of writing. You need to just love words and sitting down alone for hours at a time. If you can't do that, if you're not able to sit alone for hours at a time, you're not able to sit in a corner and be alone with your ideas and your thoughts, you need lots of people around, lots of stimulation, you can't quite focus, it might be a lot more challenging than you realize. But I'm going to take you through everything I go through from the initial idea to the finished book. Where do ideas come from? This, I believe, is the most difficult one to deal with. Ideas, for me, ideas come every day, every minute of the day, every second of the day. Ideas come to me more in the mornings or when I'm very, very relaxed. So in the morning when I've first woken up and I'm sort of walking around doing my business, making coffee, pulling back the curtains, that's when I'm just getting flooded with ideas. I don't know why. I think it's different for everyone. I believe that we'll all get ideas at different times of the day, different when we're doing different things. Some people get ideas when they're cycling, some people get ideas when they're actively moving at the gym, on their commute to work. I get ideas first thing in the morning. That's when I'm just bombarded constantly, and I need to learn to quieten my brain down, to document my ideas, to scribble things down in a hurry, to figure out what's important, what's not important, what do I want to work with, what do I not want to work with, or to write every single idea down and figure out in the next few months, next few years, next few decades, what is crucial and what isn't. Now, when I talk about my Heathen series came to me gradually. A lot of my stories were stories inspired since childhood. They were ideas that I got. I got the inkling. When I say an idea, it wasn't a fully fleshed out idea, it was an inkling, just a tiny little speck of dust, and I had to decide, am I going to continue with it? So I would write all these ideas down and then I would act on them. When you first get that initial idea, it could be anything. I always say it could be someone's shoes, someone's hair brushing past you on the bus, you know, a man in a car sitting, staring at his radio. It could be a cloud formation. An idea could come from anywhere. I like to call it a bit of magic. It starts as a little bit of fairy dust, and then it gradually forms into this entire story. One thing you need to get comfortable with is documenting your ideas as soon as they happen. You need to write them down, you need to record them, you need to have tiny scraps of paper. But it's not just enough to write them down. You need to be able to do that and document them and have them in a folder somewhere or on your phone somewhere where they're all stored away. Now, there's one little caveat. Those ideas, you'll get so many of them, you will have to eventually go back and go through them and start to pick which you want to work on as stories and which you want to shelve for the meantime. Just because you shelve them doesn't mean they're bad ideas, it just means you're not ready to work on the story just yet. Next, you have to start to build. It's like you're an architect or someone working on a construction. You need to start to put it all together. What's going to go where? What's the story about? And I believe this is where the organizational bit, for those of you people who like organizing and you like making mind maps and drawing probably world maps or corkboards. I've only started using corkboards, but I'm not very vigilant and diligent with corkboards because I like to write everything down. I like to look at the sheet of paper and see what I've written down. I just write my notes down, and that's how I plan. I don't actually have any maps. I might start experimenting with maps and experimenting with charts and all that sort of stuff, but I just like to write everything down. So you need a way of getting all your ideas together and starting to say, okay, what is this about? Where do I want the story to go? How do I want it to begin? How do I want it to end? And just start to build, just building the building blocks, putting them all together until you have a sort a frame or a structure of some sort. Are you someone who likes to plot, or are you someone who likes to just wing it like I do? I've started to plot a lot more, especially if you're writing to release books, because you cannot be too whimsical about it. There is a bit of whimsy, there has to be a bit of whimsy there, but you have to be very, very good at structuring your work. And when you want to structure your work and structure the outline of the novel, you have to plot on some level. Some people can get away with not plotting, but I've started to plot a lot more. I'm not very, like I said, disciplined, but I am plotting a lot more. And my Heathens series is going to be a 7-book series. With a 7-book series, you need plotting. I did no plotting with the Dwellers series because I wrote it from a young age and I worked on it as an adult, so I had that basic outline. But for the Dwellers Beneath the Arches was 3 books. Heathens is 7 books, and it's a whole legacy, it's a whole world within worlds, and it's quite complex, so you want to be sure to get everything correct. And Heathens deals with a lot of magical systems compared to the Dwellers Beneath the Arches. The Dwellers Beneath the Arches is more, there isn't as much magic, it's more a magical world, a fantasy world within our world, whilst Heathens is more a slither of our world within a magical world. So the magical world is big, and then you have the witching clans, the warlock clans, you have the other magical creatures, so you have all these magical systems. And when you're dealing with magical systems and very deep, heavy fantasy, yeah, I would suggest plotting. The first draft. This is always a difficult one. You need an outline. Honestly, get yourself an outline. Don't just open the book, open your laptop or a blank sheet of paper and then start typing or writing. You need start with an outline of some sort. It will save you tears, it will save you pain, it will save you confusion, especially if you're writing something that has lots of people in it, lots of characters, protagonists, antagonists. Please use an outline. It doesn't have to be anything difficult, it doesn't have to be anything grand. Just start with what's going to happen along the book, and then have maybe bullet points with each sentence, just to say, okay, this is what I want to happen. That's why, I tend to write everything down, because I can see it in a much clearer manner, and I can see the timed outline, and I can see when, something is going to happen here, but how can that happen here when this hasn't happened 3 chapters before? Outlining is very, very important. How do I outline? I just write, like I said, on sheets of paper. I don't do it, some people use corkboards, some people use maps. I don't do all that. I might try it, it might be fun, but for me, I think it just represents a lot more work. And I'm simpler, I just like to write. I think for those of you who work in more jobs where you have a lot more structure and you have to use diagrams, you might enjoy that sort of outlining. But for me, that is difficult and hard, and I can be very, very lazy. Your initial draft is going to be messy. You're going to be, especially if it's your very first story or novel you've written, it's going to be messy. It's going to be, I call it a brain dump. Some people call it verbal diarrhea. I call it word diarrhea, or, vomiting all the words out. You just want to get everything on paper. You want just everything down there, everything you want in the book. Just write it down in your first draft. Don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. Don't be afraid to write something that you think might be a bit silly. Write it all down, because you never know because that first draft is not your final draft. You're going to have to write a first, second, third. I don't go over 3 drafts, and by the time I'm doing a third draft, the book is already there. But it's just me being extra cautious, just to make sure that all my systems are in place and I don't want to add anything else, because there's nothing more frustrating and sending it off to your editor and saying, oh, I want to add this, I want to add that, oh, I want to do this, that, I want to do that. Oh, will this be more interesting? Will this be more captivating to the readers? It's annoying. And usually with the editor, you'll have a first draft and a second draft. So try and make it count. Your editor is there to edit for you. And if you have a nice editor, they will do an amazing job. So leave the editing to the editor. Don't try and make sentences sound a certain way or sound, leave that to the editor. What I want you to do is get all your ideas down and just try and make them as readable and as manageable as possible. But leave the editing, leave the more complex punctuation to your editor. Even I still don't know how to punctuate properly, and I've school, university, I've done all that. I read a lot. I'm not great at punctuation. I know where bullet point periods should go. I know where most times commas should go. I know the difference between it is and it's. I know that, but I'm still not great with punctuation. Leave the proper editing to the editor. That's what they're there for. And if you get a good editor, they'll do you really proud. How do you turn off that inner editor when you're writing your first draft? This is how you do it. And it's going to be very, very scary. You set a timer. I've said this before. Set a timer, 15-minute timer. I would start to... If you're prone to wanting to edit your work, I would start with setting a 5-minute timer, 10-minute timer. I would start with 5 minutes and just write for 5 minutes without going back on your work, without editing. Just write as it comes to you. And then start again, write as it comes to you, start again, continue from the last sentence, write as it comes to you. No editing whatsoever, no going back, oh, what is this word, where should this punctuation go, where should this comma go, where should this, no, just leave it to the editor. And then I would say set realistic goals for your drafts. So if you're going to write daily, especially if you have a job, you might not even have a job, but if you're going to write daily, just try and write for 5, 10, 15 minutes. Set a very realistic goal, because what you don't want to do is sit there for hours and hours and hours and get frustrated with yourself and start to criticize the work and get down about the work and shelve it. Because what ends up happening is you think, oh, I'm an imposter, this is crap, this does not deserve to be seen, it looks like rubbish, I'm going to get rid of it. And that's what tends to happen. And then finally, that first draft is done. Shake yourself off, pat yourself on the back. You've finished that first draft, how many words it may be, you finished it. What I want you to do is just put it aside. That's what I tend to do. I just put it aside and I start working on something else. Or I go for a long run, or I go for a weekend away and read several books. Just put it aside and go on to something else. And then you want to come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes. Because what happens is if you keep working on that draft over and over and over again, you are not looking at it from a different perspective. You are still obsessing over it and you're not looking at it with a more critical eye. Your second draft should be a lot more critical, a lot more critical, where you want to be able to read it and really it should flow. It will not be perfect. Your punctuation will not be perfect. Your use of words will not be perfect. You might repeat words, you might mix up sentences a bit, but it should be readable. And then that's when your editor comes in and they can say, oh, let me polish this and make it the perfect piece of work. When you go over the second, third draft, you want to be able to read the story. Just read it as a story, not as a published book. Just read it as a story, and you should be able to read it and not be kicked out of the story. And when I say kicked out of a story, it's when you're reading a book and then you say something along the lines of, oh, the dark, someone who is like much darker than me, their cheeks were rosy red. So you're talking about someone who's from a very African, from an African background. You're talking about someone from an African background with the blue-black skin tone, and then you say their cheeks went a rosy red. That is the sort of thing that kicks a reader out of the story, because it's not. I know it's a fantasy you might be writing, or a storybook of some sort, but it kicks the reader out of the story. And I've had that where in published books, traditionally published books, really well critiqued, where I've read sentences and I've just been kicked out of the story, and no matter what I do, I can't get back into the story. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for words, sentences that don't make any sense, that might kick a reader out of the story. Okay, so go forth, write that first book, write that first draft, do that outline, and let me know how it goes in the comments.